Welcome to Viking.TV's very first episode of Wine Wednesday. I'm very excited to be your host for the next 6 weeks. We're actually going to skip 1 week, so it'll be 7 weeks, but we have 1 week missing for a national holiday somewhere. But we have a wonderful lineup of really fun guests, and we're going to be talking about their wineries. We're going to be talking about wines. We'll be tasting some wines, and you can ask questions. I'll see them, I hope. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first guest. He's called Konstantin Guntrum. He comes from Germany, and the reason I chose him as our first guest is several reasons. First of all, I think that Riesling is one of the greatest 4 grapes in the world. Secondly, Konstantin and I have a friendship that goes back a very long time. In fact, I started working with his dad in 1982 when I lived in Canada. And when I started my own company, Broadbent Selections, which is a wine importing company here in the US, Guntrum was the first non-fortified wine which we brought on. I started off as ports and Madeiras, but Guntrum was the very first supplier. So it makes sense that he's a first Wine Wednesday guest. WW, it should have been, he's from Germany, it should have been the second one for WW2, but I guess WW1 involved Germany too. Wine Wednesday #1 visitor. Konstantin, welcome.
It's my pleasure to be on the show, Bartholomew, and thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. And where are you calling from, your house or your office?
From my house. It's 8 o'clock in the evening, so I decided to do the call from home rather than from the office.
Are you keeping the kids quiet? Are they all watching you, or are they running around somewhere?
Well, they're not watching me, but my wife Stephanie asked them to turn off the Wi-Fi. So it'll be interesting to hear from them after the show what they have been doing for the last hour without internet connection. So that'll be a challenge for them.
Yeah, I tried doing that with my son, and he keeps turning it back on. I cannot figure out how he does it, but every time I think I've got around it, he seems to get around it again. And anyway, it's like chasing your tail. You never actually get to the end of it. Well, we're going to be talking about your family, your wines, and you've been making wine in the Rhine Hessen, well, not you, but your family, since what,
1648.
1648. It's quite amazing. Tell us how that started. Who was the first person, and was he already in the Rhine Hessen? Were there other vineyards there? Tell us a bit about the history of that.
Interestingly enough, it starts in 1648, very close to where we are nowadays. It starts in a small village called Werstadt, which is about 50 miles west from where we are nowadays. And my ancestors then, well, first of all, 1648, because there were 30 years of civil war before that, from 1618 to 1648. And all of the family records in those days were held inside the churches. Now, since that was a civil and basically a religious war, I would burn your church, you would burn my church. At the end of the day, we all would not have churches anymore, and our family records were gone. So you find actually quite a few families in the area that can trace back family roots until 1648, but not beyond. So we know that 1648, my ancestors were running an inn, they were growing grapes, they were making wine. And then they moved to, we are nowadays, and we were in those days, on the left bank of the Rhine River, and then they moved to the right bank of the Rhine River in 1792. They moved to the right bank, or they fled basically from where they were, because they were Huguenots, basically Protestants. And the left bank...
My family were Huguenots too. We have that in common.
Here we go, we're just learning that anew. They were Huguenots, and the left bank of the Rhine River became French occupied following the French Revolution in Paris in 1789. And the French Catholics, no offense, but they had chopped off heads by the dozens in Paris of Huguenots. So my ancestors decided it would be a smart move if they wanted to keep their head on their shoulders, not under their arms, to move away. So they left the left bank of the Rhine River and fled across the Rhine River and settled in Bensheim, which is about 30 miles east from here, basically on the other side of the Rhine River valley. So they came from the left bank, hillsides along the Rhine River, and they moved to the right bank of the river, hillsides again. So perfect growing conditions. And they basically started afresh in Bensheim in 1792. And then in 1909, my great-grandfather Louis Guntrum, hence today's company name, Louis Guntrum moved back to the left bank of the Rhine River. It was two brothers at the time, Louis and Gustav, and they had built up the operation in Bensheim to run an inn. They had a brewery, they had a winery, they were wine merchants and traded wines from all across Germany. And in 1909, they decided they wanted to expand further, but there was just simply not enough space in Bensheim. So they decided to part ways. Gustav stayed on the right bank, and Louis Guntrum returned to the left bank of the Rhine River. And that was the nucleus of what our family estate is all about today.
Do you have a picture of that? We have a wonderful behind-the-scenes person, James Prismall, who will be showing us pictures. Here we are. And that's the estate from which side of the river? So we're on the...
We're on the east side, so we're basically looking west. And that is when, to our viewers, if you have been on a Rhine cruise with Viking cruises, you have passed this place. This is exactly the perspective you would have had. And if you want to have that perspective in reality, book your first Viking Rhine River cruise as soon as we can start moving around again, as we all want to.
And then that's the picture from the hill behind. So you're on that's what, an east-facing vineyard?
Exactly, that's an east-facing vineyard, quite steep. And as you said, Bartholomew, we're looking onto the building from the other side and onto the Rhine River.
It brings back a chilling memory. The first time I went to visit your family's estate, I was moving to Canada in 1982, in December of 1982. And before I went, the company I was going to work for when I was just 20 years old, they sent me to see various wine suppliers around Europe. And one of them was, so this was November, December of 1982. And I arrived at your winery, and your father sent me up that hill, I think it was that hill, or one certainly very nearby and equally steep, to pick grapes. And they were sort of really, it was freezing conditions and horrible experience, but really gave you respect for how you guys make this wine, because you can't use tractors, you can't automatically harvest those things. It's all hand harvested, right?
On those hillsides, it's all hand harvest. It's all hand labor throughout the year. In those extremely steep vineyards along the Rhine River and along the Moselle River, there is no mechanical work possible. That's all hand labor.
So this picture here, we see the winery which we just saw, and to the left of that is a house. Was that your estate originally?
It's the large estate building, and then there is a small tiny house basically in the middle, and to the very left side of the picture you see a fairly big villa. The small house in the middle, that's basically the nucleus of the entire building structure. That dates back to 1783 and was an old post station. So basically a place to change horses that were dragging the carriages, and for people to stay overnight and then move on. So that house was there already when nothing else was around. That belongs to our estate now today as well.
Is it your office? Or?
No, it's two apartments that we have rented out. And in the basement, there's a larger garage that we are using for tractor and sort of vineyard equipment. And the villa to the very left side was built in 1895. And my great-grandfather, Louis Guntrum, bought that in 1909 when he moved back to the left bank of the river and when he moved back to Nierstein, which was, my father had to sell it about 20 years ago, but it was built in a very bourgeois style. There is the larger part for the owners, for the family, and the smaller part for the employees. And interestingly enough, when this mansion was built in 1895, to the extent that the part for the owners, for the family, had central heating, but no kitchen, whereas the part for the employees had a kitchen, but no central heating. So interestingly enough, quite bourgeois style of building. That does not belong to us anymore, but the smaller building in the middle, as well as the large estate building, is part of the estate.
So when as a child, were you running around those buildings just having field day, or?
I was running around those buildings. I was running around in the vineyards at times, particularly in the harvest season. And I will never forget, we'll see pictures of the cellars later on. And I was always in great fear when my father told me, well, can you go down into the cellar and pick this up or pick that up? Because I was always walking through the cellar, turning my head 180 degrees, because there was always someone running behind me. It was obviously my own echo that I heard, but I was scared to death because I always thought there's someone chasing me in this, for a child, huge and really dark cellar. So nowadays I don't have that fear anymore. I know it's the echo and not anything else. But whenever I go into the cellar, whenever I went into the cellar with our children when they were small, or whenever I'm going into the cellar with visitors having small children, I make sure they know what that is and that it's just us in the cellar, not anyone else.
That's fantastic. Those cellars are amazing. I don't know if it's possible to see a picture of the cellar right now. James, if you're there, it'd be wonderful to see one of those pictures. But there we are. Yeah, you can imagine as a little kid running around those cellars alone. That must have been a bit spooky.
Absolutely. That was absolutely spooky, absolutely scary. And that's just one aspect. What you see here, maybe between 80 and 100 meters long. In total, the cellars encompass about 700 to 800 meters underground surface. So spooky is just about the right word, Bartholomew.
If you go back to the previous picture, it reminds me of a wonderful one. I went to a wonderful party at Schramsberg Winery in Napa Valley where they had candlelit, just like this. They had these deep caves, and they had a reception sort of area right at the end of a very long series of pastures. And I was very young and immature back then, probably still am. So I decided to leave there and snuff out all the candles on my way. And people got stuck out there in the dark. It was hilarious. Well, maybe not for the host, but it was very funny at the time.
Great story. And how did you make your way back?
Well, I had no problem because I was going along snuffing the candles out. It was people behind me who had problems.
Great story.
But let's talk about well, just on where you live. The Viking ships go past, which must be a fantastic sight watching them go by. Here's a wonderful map of the river. Let's look at that. So walk us through that one, Konstantin.
This map basically shows the Viking cruise route as it's offered in the UK, which, to my understanding, starts in Trier and goes down the Mosel River, passing the villages of Bernkastel and Cochem, and then moving into the Rhine River in Koblenz, and then going up the Rhine River basically going south from Koblenz to Mainz, Speyer, and all the way up to Basel, or down to Basel, in Switzerland. And we are, when you look at the city of Mainz and the city of Speyer, we are almost in the middle between those two villages, right on the Rhine River.
I might just add that these first six episodes of Wine Wednesday are focused on countries to which Viking either sails along rivers or goes to as a destination. So we have some amazing destinations like England and well, the English episode is going to be exciting. We have a surprise celebrity guest who hasn't been announced yet, so that's going to be fun. But next week we're in Italy, but today we're in Germany on the Rhine-Hessen, and people might say, well, you haven't got an episode on the Moselle. The reason for that is I left it off because I want to have a second season, and I had to have something else to attract them. The second season will go further afield to places like Australia and New Zealand, and we'll do the Moselle. So what grapes do you grow apart from? I know that the Rhine-Hessen, which, by the way, the Rhine-Hessen in Hugh Johnson and Jancis Robinson's 7th edition of the World Wine Atlas, they describe the Rhine-Hessen as one of the two most exciting wine-producing regions in Germany, and apparently Müller-Thurgau is about 16%, and Riesling is even less than that. So you must have a lot of. How many other grape varieties are grown in the Rhine-Hessen, and how many do you grow?
Well, if you take the full picture, you probably find between 25 and 30 different grape varieties being grown in Rhine-Hessen. However, there has been a trend to focus more on classic grape varieties. So Riesling has been on a steep rise over the last 15, 20 years. Grape varieties like Pinot Gris, which we call Grauburgunder in Germany, or Pinot Blanc, which we call Weißburgunder, have seen a steep increase. Red grape varieties have seen a remarkable increase with the change of climate. Pinot Noir has always been around, but when you ask older people, and with my gray hair, I should be careful speaking about elderly people, but when you ask people that have been drinking wine in the 60s and 70s of the last century, they say German red wines were basically undrinkable. And remembering as a small child, remembering the climatic conditions as you described them in November or December of 1982, remembering those climatic conditions, it makes perfect sense that red wine, that climate was simply not appropriate for growing red grapes and making red wine. But with the changing climate in the last 20 years, we have seen a drastic increase in red grape varieties, Pinot Noir. Some people are even growing Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah nowadays. So I think those are the grape varieties that really make for probably 75% of the total production in Rhine-Hessen. But when you compare it to other regions like the Moselle, as you've mentioned, Bolu, or the Rheingau, where Riesling accounts for between 80 and 90% of the production, if you compare that, then Rhine-Hessen certainly has a phenomenal diversity of grape varieties that we are growing and that we are making wine out of it.
Brilliant. I don't want to remind me. I want to go back in a second to the visiting the area, because you've got this wonderful video I want to show, but not yet. I just want to ask you just another thing on these, because Ardith from Asheville asked about the effects of global warming on wine productions in Europe, and I guess that question will come up in every single episode, because it is so important. And England couldn't make good wine 20 years ago, but till now they're making sparkling wine as good as champagne, if not better. So how has global warming impacted you and the varieties that are grown there, how does that make you look at your future? What are you doing to secure your future as far as wine, which grapes you're going to use?
Securing the future is almost a slightly scary question. It's definitely a highly challenging subject and question. Until a few years ago, irrigation was completely prohibited in Germany. So we were not allowed to irrigate the vines. Today, that is allowed. But that permission doesn't really help us because we haven't installed the infrastructure to the day. So we don't have the pipelines or the pumps. We don't have sufficient water supply. If we are facing drought summers like we have seen in the last 3 consecutive years, there is so little water in the Rhine River that you can't take water out of the river because the river would simply dry out. So securing the future...
That would be very annoying for Viking cruise lines. They wouldn't like you at all if we did that.
As long as they stop in Nierstein and we have enough wine to drink, that would be a point. But it actually was a Viking cruise ship that got stuck in Nierstein, I think, in summer of 2015, where the water level was so far down that the ship simply couldn't go further, and the ship was docked in Nierstein for, I would say, between a week and 10 days. And the passengers had been picked up with buses and taken to I don't know where.
Presumably another ship somewhere else to enjoy.
Somewhere else, or been driving around in the coach. But climate change is definitely a huge challenge. We are adapting as much as we can, as much as it makes sense. With grape varieties, as I said, production of red grapes has risen quite remarkably in the last 20 years. But then, obviously, it's still not warm enough to grow a large amount of Cabernet Sauvignon, for example, or of Merlot. And nevertheless, we are not only used to growing Riesling predominantly, but that's what we know best how to grow it in our circumstances and growing conditions. And the point is, the decision I take today when I'm replanting a vineyard is a decision that is taken for the next 30 to 40 years. What do I know about the climatic and growing conditions in 40 years' time? So that's a huge challenge. Still, for most of what has been planted with Riesling, most of the steep hillside vineyards that have been planted with Riesling for decades and centuries is being replanted with Riesling. But to be honest, we don't exactly know what we are facing. And we've seen dramatic effects of global warming and climate change, particularly the last 3 years. We do see ever since 2003 that temperatures are going up and up, and that precipitation is going down and down. But 2018 and 2019, I don't want to go too much into detail, but just this one story. 2018 and 19 were very interesting vintages because 2018 was extremely dry. We had the last rain in April, and we had the first rain after that early in December. So we had 7 months with literally no precipitation. The grapes were small. The expectation was for a very small yield. And much to everyone's surprise, when we started picking grapes, all of a sudden there was so much juice in the grapes that everyone was really surprised. So we thought, well, whatever happened here, but we still made something good out of it. 2019 started with much more precipitation. So we thought, well, we're off and easy. We have enough rain, all will be good. And it turned out to be an extremely small yield and an extremely small vintage. Reason for that was that the water supply and the water reservoirs deep down into the soil had been completely exhausted in the previous vintage. Those are considerations that we need to, or those are events that we need to learn and need to experience and need to take lessons from for the future. And in the long term, I think we will not get away without precipitation, without irrigation. But the unanswered question is, where is the water supposed to come from?
And where is that?
We don't know. It's not going to be the river, and we do see groundwater levels dropping and dropping. So it's easy to say we need irrigation. It's probably unrealistic.
You know, there's not a single wine region in the world where I don't hear the wine producers worrying about global warming. Even in Beirut, you know, their biggest worry is not terrorism, not war, not massive explosions. Their biggest worry is global warming. Everywhere is picking about a month earlier than they used to. The only people who aren't worried are as far as wine production goes, are the English, who are actually now making great wine. I want to come back to this, but let's just go back when people visit Nierstein. If the Viking ship stops, it's not very far from your winery. You could provide buses, but you could actually walk. And I think you actually produced a video walking. Can we watch that?
We are actually probably half a mile, less than a kilometer away from the dock in Nierstein. And the beauty is when you disembark on the dock in Nierstein, you just walk along the Rhine River all the way. Here we start. That was a brief introduction to the dock in Nierstein, obviously without a Viking cruise ship.
So that's where the Viking ship would disembark.
Exactly. Nierstein is not very fancy. Nierstein is a tiny small village with about 5,000, 6,000 people living there. So it's a tiny small village in the countryside. We're heading towards the winery. So I'm basically walking south.
You're now walking like Benny Hill.
Now tell me, who is Benny Hill, Rolu?
Benny Hill, anyone who's my age or older, who's lived in America or Canada would know who Benny Hill is, and in England, because he was a very, very funny and totally today politically incorrect comedian in England. But he used to walk like that. As soon as he saw a pretty girl ahead of him, he'd speed up like that. And then he'd start chasing.
Now we're taking this movie with my son Julius, so I would not have chased girls with my son very close to me.
Probably not. No. So this is about a half a mile or half a kilometer, did you say?
Less than half a mile. It's probably a little bit more than half a kilometer, but somewhere between 600, 700, 800 meters. So it's less than a gentle 15-minute walk. Oh, wow. And you always have the river to your left and the street to your right, but don't worry about the street. That is the perspective you have from our estate's terrace, and that's the perspective you would have for the entire way walking from the dock to our estate.
That's fantastic. So unless people are very elderly and want to catch a bus, they can walk.
They can walk. It's no stairs, so it's all even. But if you don't want to walk, we could certainly arrange a bus.
This picture we're looking at now, is that the route you just walked?
No, this is from atop the vineyards in Nierstein, and it shows the entire village. You have the church in the center of the picture, and to the right of the church clock tower. If you know what you're looking for, you can see the dock on the Rhine River. But you're basically looking southbound again, and you're looking the same way that we would be walking. To the top end of the picture, you see a little inlay. The Rhine River basically makes a left bend. And you see a little inlay going straight up, which is a little harbor, and our estate is just to our direction from this inlay. So we're facing south, and you see in the very end, you could see the mountain range or the hillside range of the Odenwald Mountains. Thank you, James. The mountain range in the back is Odenwald Mountains, which is straight east from us.
for the people who've been around as long as me, your region was extremely famous for Liebfraumilch, and probably after Lunan and Black Tower, Guntrum's Seagull Liebfraumilch was probably the best known wine from Germany. And anyone who's been stationed in Germany in the military would know your wine, because Guntrum was sold at the AFIS stores and was a very big deal. And isn't there a big army base right next to very close to your winery?
Fortunately, there were numerous army bases around us. There was one in Dexheim, which is literally 2 miles away from our place, which unfortunately closed in 2009. There was obviously the headquarters of the American European Central Command in Heidelberg, which is about 30 miles. There are still a couple of bases in Wiesbaden, which is about 15 miles. So if you have been stationed in Germany with the American military, you probably have been to any of those places somewhere really close and around our place. And we were fortunate enough, or still are, to supply the American forces in Europe, and we have been doing so since 1962. So I remember when I was a child, we had many groups of GIs and soldiers visiting our estate and doing wine tastings at our estate. So we always had a great relationship with them. And it's regrettable that the number of troops has been reduced to the extent that we're seeing it nowadays. But
well, I bet a lot of people watching this have served in the military and have served in Germany, because it's amazing how many people you meet from a generation of my age or older that have actually served in the military in Germany. But it's a fascinating story about your estate during the war with General Patton. Maybe that's a good time to tell that story. I love this story.
Our estate building, or the family estate, became basically a historic site around March 22nd, 1945. General Patton rushed his troops to cross the Rhine River. It was a run between the American General Patton and the British Field Marshal Montgomery, and they both wanted to cross the Rhine River first, obviously chasing to Berlin, but they both wanted to cross the Rhine River first, and General Patton had the clear order from the Supreme Commander, General Eisenhower, not to cross the river without Eisenhower's consent. Patton obviously couldn't care less, and he wanted to be quicker than Montgomery. So he didn't wait for General Eisenhower's order, but he just crossed the Rhine River. And he did that exactly at our family's estate. So the picture we have just seen was one of the 3 pontoon bridges which the American troops erected after having built a bridgehead on the east side of the Rhine River. So this picture is basically facing west. You see the Rhine River, you see the pontoon bridge, and to the right you see the estate building as it still stands today. I'm not.
And your winery became General Patton's base, didn't it?
The winery became General Patton's base. So the winery building was seized and was used as shelter for troops, and particularly as a maintenance hall for their tanks. So we still have a picture with tanks inside the building. What is our warehouse today was a maintenance hall at the time. And in one of the early pictures we saw, or the picture right behind you, Bolu, on the wall, where you can see the estate building and the family mansion. The family mansion was seized, and that was General Patton's headquarters for a few days until he moved on.
And apart from the fact that the troops drank all your wine, you welcomed that. I think your family welcomed that, didn't they?
To be honest, I don't know. And I'm not sure if they welcomed that, but if whichever wine went to American soldiers at the time definitely served a fantastic purpose, a very good purpose, and the way from the Channel and the Atlantic Ocean had been long, and the way to Berlin was about as long again. So it served a great purpose. I don't know if anyone really welcomes occupation forces, but then when they come to liberate your country, and bring that democracy, then they are welcome. And I think in that sense, they were definitely highly welcomed. And interestingly enough, both villages where we grow grapes nowadays, Nierstein and Oppenheim, they were taken over by American troops without any demolitions, without any resistance from German troops. There were other villages a little bit further west where the Germans were stupid enough to offer resistance to the American troops, and those villages were simply leveled in a moment. So yes, they were welcome, and offering them a few bottles or barrels of wine was the least we could do.
So you don't have to answer this question, but am I dreaming, or was there some story about your grandfather knowing about the assassination attempt to try and blow up Hitler, and your grandfather's willing to knew about it and willing to sacrifice himself in that attempt? What is that a story I'm imagining, or?
That was the grandfather from the other side. So if we have been talking about the Guntrum family, my father's side, until now, that grandfather that you're talking about, Bartholomew, was my mother's father. And he was serving in the German army under Hitler. And he was actually in the room when the attempted assassination of Hitler on July 20th, 1944 happened. And he was aware when Stauffenberg entered the room, he was very well aware of what was about to happen. And he was severely injured and captured by Gestapo still while being in hospital, and was put in prison for months.
And the reason the assassination failed, it was a bomb in a suitcase or something, and it was under a heavy oak table, which unfortunately stopped the bomb's most devastating effects. Is that correct?
That is correct. That saved Adolf Hitler's life, and it saved my grandfather's life. So there's always pros and cons to that. Had the bomb been on the correct side of the table, both would have been killed.
That's amazing, amazing story.
And as I said, my grandfather knew when Stauffenberg came in to position the bomb, my grandfather knew that these would be his last minutes.
Wow. And how long did he survive after his injuries? Did he survive to ripe old age?
Yes, he passed away in 1982. So he survived. Fortunately, he survived long enough so that I was able to meet him.
Let's get back to. Thank you for sharing that story. I think for the world, that's a fascinating story. I think people knew about the assassination attempt, and to meet someone whose grandfather was actually in that room is quite an extraordinary thing for people to see or hear, and making Riesling. Let's talk about Riesling. Lots of questions coming through. There's a very funny one. I don't know if it's meant to be funny, from Arjun. Arjun says, how do you pronounce all these wines? I find it difficult to pronounce Riesling and Sauvignon. But yeah, for sure. I mean, when you look at a wine like the beautiful wine I was having for lunch today, it was Louis Guntrum, Oppenheimer, Herrenberg, Riesling, Auslese 2012. Yeah, it's confusing, but it's once people know, it's not that confusing. And by the way, look at the color of this wine I had for lunch today. It's just a beautiful golden color. I find Rieslings really don't even reach their best until they're at least 6 or 7 years old. And I had this for lunch. It's a perfect lunchtime wine. One of the things we are confronted with selling wine in America is, especially in the South, that I find people, instead of having wine for lunch, they drink sweet tea or they drink Coca-Cola or something like that. And they say, when you talk about Riesling, they say, oh, I don't like sweet. And I think it's really, really interesting that the blue bottle Riesling, which we're going to taste in a minute, that is 28 grams per litre of sugar, whereas sweet tea is 38 grams a litre, and Coca-Cola is 106 grams per litre. And those are added sugars in the Coke and the sweet tea, and you're supposed to only drink 36 grams of added sugar per day. And so, 38 sweet tea, you've already surpassed that with one sweet tea. And with the Rieslings, they're natural sugar, they're not added sugar. And they are much lower sugar content than sweet tea or fizzy drinks. So people who say they don't like sweet wine, I think they're confusing richness of fruit with sweetness of sugar, because they're not really very sweet wines. You do have some extremely sweet wines, like the Tropical Auslese, which is the sweetest of all. But generally, German Rieslings are very pretty, perfect summer wines and perfect lunchtime wines and perfect afternoon. My father drank German Spätlese or Auslese at 4 in the afternoon. It was the perfect afternoon wine for him. And the other great thing is, people say, oh, I don't drink wine because it makes me sleepy. Yes, it makes you sleepy. If you drink a 15% alcohol wine, it makes anyone sleepy. But this wine I had for lunch is only 8.5%. And I think I'll just, sorry to go on a bit about this, but I just tell you a story about alcohol, which a lot of people don't realize. That, let's say, Konstantin, you drank a bottle of wine that's 12.5% alcohol, and I drank a bottle of wine that's 15% alcohol. The difference of alcohol intake that I had over you would be almost 3 vodka tonics. So would you drink a bottle of wine and then ask your friends for 3 vodka tonics? Most of your friends would think you're absolutely nuts, but that's what you do if you have 15% wine, a whole bottle instead of a 12.5. Or to put it in another way, a wine that's 12.5% alcohol, you can drink 2 glasses and be under the drink drive limit in most places. Not all, most. But if you drink a glass of wine that's 15% or 14.5%, you're over the drink drive limit. So when you think that your German Rieslings, the one I had for lunch today is 8.5%. The blue bottle, which we're going to taste, is 9.5%. The Nierstein Riesling Rich Spätlese, Rehbach Spätlese, is 10%. So these are low alcohol wines, so they don't make you sleepy. It's really hard to get drunk. You have to drink a lot of that alcohol level to get drunk. So I don't know why people don't drink Riesling all the time for lunch.
And there are so many aspects, excuse me for interrupting, Bartholomew, there are so many aspects that I would like to pick you up on. I will not take up the next 20 minutes, but just a few points. As you compared German Riesling and Louis Guntrum wines in particular with sweet tea or other sweet sugared beverages, the point is, if you pair any of those Rieslings with food, you will have a delightful lunch or a delightful dinner. If you pair sweet tea or Coke with any kind of food, the taste of the drink will always overwhelm the food. The taste of the drink, you may like it or you may not like it, but if you like it, it's a good taste, but you will never have the taste of the food. A Riesling with, as you said, Bartholomew, between 8 and 12% alcohol will always enhance the flavor of the food and just make a lunch or a dinner more pleasant and more enjoyable. But I want to answer Arjun's question that we started this part of the conversation with when he said, well, it's so difficult to pronounce those names. Obviously, I do agree. Oppenheimer Herrenberg Riesling obviously is easy for me to pronounce, not so much for you perhaps. If you can pronounce Riesling, that's obviously great. That's sort of the entry card. If you pronounce it Riesling, it doesn't matter because you have to make yourself understood. If you go into your local wine shop and you want to purchase a bottle of Riesling and your shop clerk knows what you're looking for, that's perfect. Sauvignon Blanc is another grape variety, but you can abbreviate it to Sauv Blanc, and most people will know what you're talking about. So just don't be afraid of pronouncing a grape variety or a wine name the way you simply pronounce it. If it's wrong by the standards of the producer, it doesn't really matter. I'm happy if you pronounce the names of my wines. If you don't pronounce it as I would pronounce it, never mind. We'll find each other over the taste of the wine, much rather than over the name of the wine. And to finalize that point, when you look at a German label, admitted there are numerous words in a strange language on the label. But if you learn the denomination, the German wine label is probably the most precise you can find in the world. Riesling obviously would be the grape variety. Auslese would be the quality level, of which we have several. The first two words on the label, Oppenheim Herrenberg, in the example that Bartholomew just quoted, the first one would be the name of the village, and the second one would be the name of the single vineyard. So if you know those parameters, you're pretty safe, and you have a more specific indication as to what you're buying than from most other wine labels. But having said that, again, if you know what Riesling is and you know that you like Riesling, that's all it takes.
Yeah, and I think so. It's obviously this picture here shows the label. It says Guntrum is the name of brand. Nierstein is a village. The next word is a vineyard, Rayback, and the fourth word is a grape, Riesling. Now, underneath that, it might get a little bit more complicated because it tells you exactly how sweet it is. So going in this order, we don't have a slide to show you, but there's a wine called Trocken, which is about less than 9 grams per liter. So you can get very dry Rieslings of sugar. And then you have cabinets, which are usually from 25 to 40 grams per liter. And then you go up to Spätlese, which is maybe 40 to 70 grams per liter. Then you have what we call Auslese, which is 60 to 100 grams per liter. And all of these are, for me, table wines. And none of them are dessert wines. None of them are sweet. They're rich, yes, but they're not sweet. Then you do get into slightly the sweeter dessert wine categories, which are Beer and Auslese, which goes from 80 to 160 grams per liter. And then a Trocken Beer and Auslese, which is the very sweetest, which is about 230 grams per liter. But you'd never drink more than a glass or two of that, so you're not really drinking that much. And then there is one other category of wine, which is the ice wine. And a lot of people know ice wine as a sweet, prestigious wine. Unfortunately, they think of Canadian ice wines now, which could be made in a refrigerator. But I think it's really interesting to explain how you make your German ice wines. Penguin, by the way, is what you used to call it. But tell me if I'm mistaken, you only pick when it's full moon and only when the grape's been frozen on the vine for 3 solid days. Is that correct?
Actually, one night would be sufficient, but it has to be at least by law, it has to be minus 7 degrees Celsius, whatever that, but maybe in Fahrenheit. The colder it is, the better it is. The intention of ice wine is to freeze the grape juice inside the grape naturally. So as you said, don't pick the grapes in September and put them in a freezer, but leave them on the vine, freeze the grape naturally. what happens is that we basically concentrate the grape and its components. When I went out, and I'm speaking in the past, and I will explain why I'm speaking in the past. When I went out into the vineyards at 4 o'clock in the morning and took a single berry off the bunch and cracked it open, that I didn't want to have to get sticky hands. All the grape juice was supposed to be solidly frozen. And as I said, that happens better at -10, -12 degrees Celsius than at -7. With -7, you may need to have 2 consecutive nights to really have the grapes solidly frozen. And then we pick the grapes very early in the morning, rush them to the winery, press them. And what actually happens is that we retain the ice in the press. The ice is basically the grape juice inside the grape. So what we are pressing is basically the skin. And by pressing the skin, we get the essence of the grape, the essence in flavors, in sugar, obviously, in acidity, which is highly important. So we just get the concentrate of the grape. Having said all that, it means that we get a very, very small yield. We expect that we need about 1 kilogram of grapes for any given bottle of Riesling. Cabinet Spätlese is a quality level. 1 kilogram of grapes per bottle. For ice wine, we need 10 kilograms of grapes for the same amount of juice. So we lose about 90% of the quantity in order to get an extraordinary quality. A wine that can age for 20, 30, 40 years. Easily, the bottle you just showed, Bartholomew, is from 2004. And should still be drinking beautifully at age only 16. So ice wine always was something really unique and very special. And again, I'm speaking in the past because due to global warming and climate change, ice wine is something that doesn't happen anymore. We haven't had ice wine in the last 7 years. And I don't really expect that we will have growing conditions again that will allow us to make ice wine. So if you have a bottle of ice wine in your cellar, make sure you appreciate it. Yes, Paul, exactly.
So it's historically, and by the way, I do see everyone's questions, and I am going to get to your questions in a couple of minutes, but to make the Birnauslese and the Trockenbirnauslese, those have to be affected by the botrytis, the noble rot, as we call it, a sort of mold which molds the grapes and give it this delicious flavor, kind of like you molded, moldy cheeses. Blue cheeses have this mold which gives them beautiful flavors. So, is the ice wine always botrytis as well, or not?
No, the ice wine actually should come from juicy berries. The intention is, as I said, to freeze the juice inside.
That's right. Sorry, yes.
So for ice wine, you want to have fully intact, juicy grapes where you can actually freeze the juice inside. Whereas for botrytized wines like Birnauslese TVA, as you mentioned, you need the mold, the botrytis mold, to attack the grapes. But that leads to the evaporation of the entire grape juice. So botrytized wines, BA, TVA, are basically made from raisins with no juice inside or very little juice inside, whereas for ice wine, you want to have fully intact, juicy grapes.
And really, Trockenbirnauslese is considered way superior, the most ultimate superior wine compared to ice wine, right?
Yes, it is definitely more noble. It lasts longer. Trockenbirnauslese may age 60, 70, 80, 100 years. So Trockenbirnauslese is certainly more noble than ice wine.
Talking of lasting a long time, you've had a nice long marriage so far, and I want to jump back, and then I'm going to get to some questions. I want to jump back to that beautiful cellar, and I don't think they showed the engraved casks that you get for each wedding. There you go.
That was the cask that was made on the occasion of my wife's and my wedding, and interestingly enough, we have these family casks having been made over the course of the last 70, 80 years. And they always were presents of the employees to my family members, which tells a little bit a story about cooperation between employees and owners, which I think is a lovely sign. And so when we got married, our employees said, we want to continue this tradition. Problem was, at the time, we had about 8 employees, and such a barrel is fairly costly. So they came to me and they said, well, we want to continue the tradition. We really want to continue with this idea of the employees giving a present to the owners getting married. And I said, well, don't worry about the money.
How many barrels going back do you have of each wedding in the family?
I haven't counted them, maybe 10 to 12 of different family members, and they're all telling a story. James, if we can just see the picture of the barrel again real quick, because the barrel shows or gives an idea of both my wife's and my upbringing and heritage. On the top, you see a large building, which actually is the picture of a monastery in Upper Bavaria, Benedict Boyan, where we got married in 2003. And you see,
I was there. I reckon
you were there with your wife, and you had a really bad back surgery just before that, and you weren't even supposed to be on a plane at the time.
Yeah, and then I had another back surgery right afterwards. I was picking up my suitcase on the conveyor belt in Germany and thought, oh no. So 1 month after my back surgery, I flew to you and then came back and had another back surgery. Anyway.
But we will never forget that Spencer and you came to our wedding in Bavaria.
It was a spectacular wedding. So that's the Bavaria house, and then what's the rest of the barrel? I'm sorry to interrupt.
And in the center, you can barely see it here, but in the center you see the village of Nierstein with the 2 churches and the medieval watchtower, and you see the Rhine River and the vineyards with wines. You can, if you don't know what you're looking for, you can barely see it on this picture. But basically, this barrel is telling the stories of my wife's heritage and my heritage coming together.
Fabulous. If people visit you, can they see those barrels, or do they have to have an invitation, or how?
No, they can see those barrels and they can touch those barrels.
And do you have tours open to the public anytime, or is it by appointment?
It's by appointment. We don't have that many visitors passing by in our region, so it's preferably by appointment. We don't have a fixed tour or visit schedule. But appointments, whenever you are in our region, I'm happy to accommodate you if I'm at home. So appointments should not be that problem.
So if any of the 4 million people who were told about this program today happen to watch and want to go and see your winery, you'll welcome them all with open arms.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is great, James. Thank you, because here you can see much better the centerpiece of the barrel. On the top, again, the monastery where we got married. Below to the right, the Catholic Church of Nierstein. In the center, a small medieval watchtower, and to the left, the Protestant church, and the vineyards in front of the churches and the Rhine River passing by.
I just want to quickly answer Bud from Grimsby, Canada. Bartholomew, writing from Niagara, Canada, you dropped into your conversation that Canada's ice wine is made in a freezer. What I'm saying is it can be made in a freezer, and it historically has been in Canada. I'm not saying they necessarily do that right now, but what he's saying is Canadian ice wine cannot be called ice wine anymore unless it is made, as Konstantin says, -8 degrees centigrade and crushed frozen. Please correct this and respect the wines we're making here in Niagara region, award-winning across the world. I do, I lived in Canada for 5 years, and I love the wines from the Okanagan and Niagara Peninsula. They are great wines, and yes, I'm glad, Bud, that you corrected me on saying that, although I didn't say that they are made that way. I said they can be made. I didn't know they can't be made anymore, so that's a great correction. Thank you so much. Someone else Russ in Chicago, asked a very pertinent question, which I was going to ask just when I saw his question. We must have thought about it at the same time. Do either of your children show an interest in following in your footsteps? It must be a big worry for any, someone who's been around since 1648, family after generation, and your brother last time I knew, he went to work for an automobile company, and you got lumped with the winery, which was probably a blessing and a curse at the same time, because the challenge of selling wine is extremely hard, especially when you went through that transition from being a Liebfraumilch region to being the younger generations like you who are making extremely interesting, highly rated wines. Your wines are some of the most highly rated wines in Germany today, and that's a complete change from 40 years ago. So, are your children? Do you have one child in mind, or can it be determined yet? They're still young.
Thank you. That's the point. They're still young. We are blessed with three sons. Max is 16. You can see here Leopold, our youngest son, who is 10 years old now, and Julius, who is running all the techniques behind this this transmission, is 14 years. So it's still a little bit early to take any decision. I have learned from my father, who told me whatever you want to do is fine. You have gently described the obstacles and problems we have been going through in the last 30, 40 years, and myself the last 20 years. It is a fun business without any doubt. It's a lovely product. It changes from year to year. But my great advantage has been that my father never put any pressure on me. My decision to join the company was my decision. If ever I regret it, it was my own mistake. And it was not a mistake. I want the same situation for my children. If any of our children has an interest in the winery, I'll be very happy if they followed suit. If they have other ambitions, they should follow their ambitions because it's their life. And I know numerous colleagues that have followed family heritages and family traditions because they were told to. And until they're getting old and older, they do regret those decisions, and that's why we'll see what happens. If any of the three wants to follow up, we can talk about it. If they follow other paths, we'll find a solution to that. But it's their life and it's their happiness.
I'm second generation in the wine business. Obviously, my father, Michael Broadbent, who died earlier this year, was a big wine guy, and I really fell into the wine business basically because I didn't know what else to do. At least I started my own business and created my own path. But really, I think if I'd had more imagination and been told you can do whatever you want in the world, I would have been probably someone like Hugh Grant. I think he had a perfect job. Let's move on to some of these questions, and we're going to taste the blue Riesling. You can tell us about the blue Riesling whilst we're answering. Alexis and Reno asked what food goes best with Rieslings. Damaris in Durango, what is a recommended cheese pairing for these and wines, and what's your favorite pairing? And also, whilst we're on it, talk about the blue bottle, because weren't you the very first wine company or alcohol company in the world to use a blue bottle?
We were probably the first one to use the blue bottle in new ages. When you look at the color of bottles, they were always influenced by the soil that was used locally to produce glass. So that's where the original colors came from. Bottles from the Mosel River were green, bottles from the Rhine were brown, and bottles from the tiny small river of the Nahe were made with the type of soil that made those bottles appear bluish, not quite as clearly blue as they are today. That goes back many, many decades. And when my father started with Guntrum Riesling Royal Blue Bottle in the late 1980s, there were no blue bottles on the market. When you look at how many blue bottles with German Riesling there are in the market nowadays, he was really spearheading a trend. And he was spearheading a trend of transition. You have mentioned before, Bartholomew, that Rheinhessen was the largest producer of Liebfraumilch, which in the early 1900s was a landmark wine, not only for the region, but for Germany. Only until after the war, only in the 1960s and particularly 70s and early 80s, the reputation of Liebfrauenmilch deteriorated rapidly because the wines became thin and lean and not interesting anymore, which they used to be even under the brand name of Liebfrauenmilch decades before that. So my father was looking for a replacement for our Liebfrauenmilch business. And obviously he wanted to take that challenge up with the best grape we have, which is Riesling, obviously. And then it was by initiative of the American forces in Europe that came to my father and said, we want to have a Riesling in a blue bottle. And I will never forget the conversations we had at the family's lunch and dinner table. Do we want to do a wine in a blue bottle? And the obvious answer, being German and being 10 generations into the business, was no. Here we are with our world success, Guntrum Riesling Royal Blue, which we've had for more than 30 years. And Guntrum Riesling and the blue bottle have taken the position that Liebfrauenmilch used to have before, besides that the wine inside is better than whatever you can find as Liebfrauenmilch dating back to the early 1980s.
And then you did yellow and red bottles too.
We did yellow and red bottles too to attract people. That was about the same time of introduction. We have gone away from red and yellow bottles, but we do continue with the blue bottle, and it has become the landmark for our wines in more than 50 countries around the world.
So Greg in Nashville asked what food wine pairings are most recommended with the Guntrum wines being featured today. So we haven't really, can you go back to?
For both wines, as Bartholomew explained, have a moderate level of residual sweetness. That's the type of wine that I particularly enjoy as aperitif, well chilled, a lovely aperitif, really opening your taste buds. But it also goes well with all type of spicy, well-seasoned food. And particularly in America, you have such a great range of fusion cuisine, Asian cuisine of different types, of Mexican influenced cuisine, Cajun cuisine in the South, tastes and flavors that we don't even have in Europe. But those are food pairings that go perfectly well with these wines. Imagine you have, to take a very extreme example, you have a really spicy Chinese dish, but you may turn up the heat up and down as you like. And you have this really spicy food on your palate, and you want something to cool down the heat on your palate. Now, the worst you can do is having shared that with a 14% red wine with great tannic influence, which may be a great wine on its own, but not with that kind of food, because both the tannins and the alcohols will just drive up the heat. A slightly off-dry wine, like any German Riesling, like both wines that we are tasting tonight or today, will cool down the heat of the food and will make a perfect combination of food and wine. So any kind of spicy, well-seasoned, hearty food will be a perfect combination with those wines. And Bolu, I'm sure you're more versed to talk about cheese and wine combinations than I am.
Well, I think that basically, I always think that white wine goes better with cheese than red wine. In fact, red wine is really not very good with cheese unless you do port with Stilton. But you should always have white wine with cheese. And Riesling is a wine which can go with both blue cheeses and things like Bries and things like that. Another question, there is several questions. Santina in Chicago, is there any particular characteristics that German wines have over other world wines? And I think it was Michelle in Canada who says, how do you compare your Rieslings to those that have won awards in the Southern Niagara, Canada? And I know that they're making beautiful New Zealand wines at Spy Valley. Rieslings are beautiful there. But really, German Rieslings are the benchmark, are the ultimate expressions of Riesling still come from Germany. Can you explain and elaborate?
The secret behind a great Riesling is very moderate growing conditions. For Germany, we say we need about 100 days from blossoming to ripening. We need 100 days of moderate temperatures, ideally precipitation, rain on and off, so that the vine has enough water supply. But vital is that temperatures don't go up too far. 30 degrees should be maximum, and we do see higher temperatures than that nowadays. But a moderate climate is key to successful Riesling making, because what you want in a Riesling and what differentiates Riesling grown in serious cool climates from other white wines from around the world is the level of acidity. And here comes into play again the sweetness or the residual sugar that we have been talking about in Riesling before. Even if you have a Spätlese or Auslese with a certain amount of residual sweetness, you also have a wine that carries a fair amount of natural acidity. And that acidity makes for a vibrant and lively taste impression. So you have a mouthful of flavors, of richness, of sweetness on your palate, but you have a zinging, cutting acidity in the finish. So you drink the wine, and in the end you say, well, this is really enticing and appealing, and give me another glass. If you grow Riesling too far south, or in the southern hemisphere too far north, temperatures are going up too far, and that means that acidity levels in Riesling go down too rapidly and too far, and you get good Riesling, but it tends to be slightly flabby. So you want to have the acidity, and that makes the main difference between German Rieslings and many Rieslings from other parts of the world. To the question of Riesling in Niagara, if I'm not totally mistaken, Niagara and Germany, Rhine-Hessen, are about at the same level of northern latitude. We are at 50-degree northern latitude. I know that's as far north as Newfoundland, and I think Niagara is not much further south. So growing conditions are as ideal in Niagara as they are in our region. It has been quite a while, unfortunately, that I've had the last Riesling from the Niagara region, but whatever I've tasted before that was really comparable to what we are growing in Germany.
I think also, obviously, the terroir is James, could you show the picture of that red soil that Konstantin has? How many, is that ubiquitous in your area, or is it different soils in your area?
No, the red soil that we're seeing right here is really something unique. It is literally world unique. It's a tiny stretch around the village of Nierstein. It's about 3 miles long and less than 1 mile deep, where we have this soil composition. And you find descriptions of German wines, German Riesling, in many pieces of great German literature where wines from this red sandstone soil is described. The most important and best well known probably is the piece from Goethe's masterpiece Faust, where he describes a scene in a student's pub in Leipzig, and the devil and Dr. Faust go into the student's pub, and the devil wants to show Dr. Faust how easy it is to seduce mankind. So they go into this pub, and the devil tells the students, you tell me whatever you want to drink. I dig a hole into this table, and out will come whatever you want to have. What do you want to drink? The question basically is, what are the greatest wines in the world? And here come the answers. The answers are champagne. That's easy and great. Number 1 is French wine. That's a little bit generic. Number 3 or 4 is Tokaj, the classic sweet wine from Hungary. And number 4 is real Niersteiner, real Rhine wine from the village of Nierstein, not from anywhere, and not from anywhere in Nierstein, but just from this tiny small stretch of red sandstone soil. So that is world unique and makes world famous wines.
The only place in the world. You're saying that 3 mile stretch is the only place in the world where they have that soil. That's
geologically, it's been named Nierstein Formation because this type of soil was not found by geologists anywhere else around the planet.
Can we show the little video? Because also it's really interesting. There's a video flying over the vineyards, which is shows the different areas. So in a short space of time, you have all these different vineyards.
And this is, you see the Rhine River in front, so this will be your perspective as you will traveling past by on Viking cruises, if permitted. And this is the stretch that is bending into the countryside, basically. So these vineyards are facing due south, whereas the first ones we saw are facing a little bit southeast. This, what we saw, is exactly this tiny small stretch of red sandstone soil. Here it comes again.
That's remarkable. Another interesting thing about Riesling, I mean, I grew up Riesling, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Pinot Noir were the four noble grapes of the world. In fact, back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, German Riesling was more expensive than the first growth Bordeaux from France. They were the classified growths from Bordeaux. And they're also the longest lived wines. I've got my father's book here, Vintage Wine. And if you turn to the German section, the oldest wine, I think it's the oldest wine he's tasted in this book, is the 1727 Apostle wine, Rudesheimer Apostle wine. But that's still in cask. But German Rieslings age as long as almost any other wines. Maybe Madeira might last longer, but old German Rieslings are some of the oldest, longest lived wines in the world.
And that was the reason why they were priced higher than the first growth from Bordeaux. It was all about ageability, and it was all about how does a wine change as it ages, and does it change to its benefit, or does it simply age? And German Riesling is one of the very few wines from around the world that, as you said, Bartholomew, can age for decades, literally for 40, 50, 60 years, because the wine has two natural preservatives. One is natural sugar and one is natural acidity. And most other white wines have either of those two components, but not both. But that's why German wines were priced as high and higher than first growth Bordeaux, because they were able to outage those wines.
Yeah, and on this line, John in the United Kingdom asks, what is the future of cork closures, especially in Germany, for long-term cellaring? And I think, do you do all your wines in screw top now?
No, we do the very top end, we do under cork. So the Großes Gewächs, the Pinot Noir Reserve, Trockenbeerenauslese, Beerenauslese, we do under cork, because your question is spot on. For everyday drinking wines, everyday meaning aging potential 20 years, a screw cap is just the perfect closure. It's neutral in taste, it doesn't destroy the wine. The wine comes to your table and into your glass exactly as the winemaker or myself have wanted to make this wine. So screw cap is just perfect for whatever we drink on a daily basis. For wines that are really meant to be cellars, it's difficult to replace the screw cap. You will know that a cork, you should be recorking after about 30 years to ensure that the cork doesn't disintegrate and the juice just simply runs off. We don't really have an appropriate solution so far to replace a screw cap. So for wines that are supposed to age, cork is still the closure of choice, but that's not because we believe under cork there is oxygen exchange that will allow the wine to age better. We do have oxygen exchange under screw cap as well, albeit less than under cork. But the point really is that you can replace a cork after 30 years, and it's quite difficult to replace a screw cap.
Yeah, some people think that screw top is inferior, whatever. When I was 19 in 1981, I was working for a winery in Barossa Valley in Australia, Yamba. I was doing a harvest there, and I was staying with the owners of the winery. And one night they brought out a wine which was a Puisy Vale Rhine Riesling, which is a wine they made in Australia, southern Australia, and it was a screw top. And they said to me, "What do you think of that wine?" And being this sort of young and naive, I said to them, well, the wine is fantastic, it's spectacular, but I hope you never use screw tops. And they said to me, and it changed my view on screw tops immediately. They said, well, first of all, this is our wine. We make this one. And so I was a little bit humbled by that. And secondly, they said, we have, and this was in 1981, they said they've been experimenting with Stelvin screw tops for 20 years. And so even back then, they had experience of wines aging for 20 years. And they said they aged beautifully. And from that moment, now I wish all wines were in the screw top. It's just so much easier to run home and unscrew a bottle of wine than to pull out the corkscrew, try and get the capsule off. You know, it's just so much quicker and more convenient. You put the wine back in the fridge with the screw top. I'm going to ask run through a few questions. I'd like to buy some of your, from Kevin in Madison, Tennessee. I'd like to buy some of your wines to have at Christmas. Which ones would you recommend? Well, they're all good. I mean, either of the wines listed today would be beautiful. What do you think?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question, Bartholomew. Apologies.
What would you drink? Which of your wines would you have for with Christmas? In England, we have turkey with Christmas, but that's usually Thanksgiving here. So Riesling and turkey go really well together.
Riesling and turkey go well. Riesling and any kind of fish or seafood go perfectly well. So for us, it would be salmon sometime during Christmas. What turkey is in the United States is goose in Germany. And Riesling goes well, as I said, with spicy food. It also goes well with really rich, hearty food because, again, the acidity cuts through. So Christmas Eve would most likely be goose and a semi-dry Riesling in the style of what we're having today.
Gwyn from Newbury says, I'm enjoying your presentation so much and smiled when I heard that the host thought that cheese actually is fine with white wine. I would never have thought an expert would say that, but I am having white wine with my 14-year-old Wisconsin cheddar cheese as we speak, since I don't have any appropriate reds. So I feel rather more sophisticated. Yes, you are. In fact, all great wine experts would say that white wine goes better with cheese than red. Anyone who doesn't say that is, I would say, less of an expert than they might think.
Simply try it out yourself.
How has technology changed the way your family have made wine over generations, and do you sometimes regret so-called advances in technology? This was from Mindy in Lake St. Louis.
We have made numerous steps back. So technology is certainly helpful. And again, we have spoken about climate change, which requires the use of technology. But basically, grape growing still is an artisanal work. And I have, especially since I took over, or when I took over from my father, I took several steps back. You can make great wine if you have great grapes. All technology does not help if you don't have great grapes. So it comes back to nature, and your question is spot on. It's still, as I said, artisanal work. On the other hand side, and that comes back to global warming. Just one interesting example, and Bartholomew described very early tonight or today how he was picking grapes in November and early December of 1982. In those days, we had a harvest ban in place in Germany. That meant you were not allowed to pick grapes before October 1st, and you were not allowed to pick any Riesling before October 15th. When you look back over the course of the last 15 years, there may have been 1 or 2 vintages where we were still picking any grapes on October 15th. All the rest was done. That shows how times have changed and how climate has changed. And that comes back to the influence of technology. Obviously, in the early 1980s, all the picking was done by hand because there were no mechanical harvesters. Today, we cannot imagine how to pick grapes by hand. This year was a perfect example. We were picking grapes in September at day temperatures somewhere between 25 and 32 degrees Celsius during the day. If you pick grapes at those temperatures, they will have started fermentation before they even reach the pressing house. So we were obviously picking grapes at 4 o'clock in the morning with a mechanical harvester, and that would have been impossible 40 years ago. So we do apply technology, but always stick to ancient rules. There is, most of the time, there is a reason why they have been successful over decades.
You're going to like these next two questions. Neil from Oxford and Peter from Winston-Salem in the US. Where can we buy Guntrum wines in England? Thank you for your interesting talk. And can we buy Guntrum wines in the USA? I'll answer for the USA because I'm your importer here, broadbent.com. You can go to info@broadbent.com and I'll answer that. Or you can go to my Facebook page, Bartholomew Broadbent, and I'll answer you. And then on the link, if you go to Viking.TV, Viking.TV.com, you'll see the link to these wines, and Wine Searcher can tell you where to buy the wines. But what about in England? I know Wine Searcher exists in England too, but what would you say?
Wine Searcher exists in England as well. We can ship to England from the estate. So if you want to order from us direct, we can easily ship that to the UK. Or else you're welcome to contact our UK importer and agent, which is Arvin Barrett Siegel, which is www.abs.co.uk, abs.co.uk. They act as our importer to the United Kingdom, as Bartholomew does for the United States.
Rhett from Atlanta has a question and an interesting comment. His question is, do you make organic wines? What do you say the advantages or disadvantages are of organic wines? And he goes on to say, my wife claims organic wines give her less of a headache. Do you believe that? And I think a lot of people seem to blame headaches on sulfites, which is nonsense because there's more sulfites on a leaf of lettuce than any bottle of wine in the world, and more sulfites in any canned goods or food. Things like an apple has more sulfites on it than a bottle of wine. But what are your comments on organic wines?
I couldn't agree more to yours, Bartholomew. Sulfur levels in organic or non-organic wines are roughly the same. Everyone, every grower, whether growing organically or conventionally, will do their best to reduce sulfur dioxide levels that are being used, and they're usually far, far beyond levels that can actually induce a headache. Organic growing, in Germany, we always love our certificates. We need to have a certificate for almost everything, unless breathing and eating. But then you don't necessarily need a certificate for organic growing, and you may still be growing organically. It's much rather a matter of my own perspective. We have been growing grapes on the same soil for generations, and we want to continue doing so. That means that you don't squeeze nature at all, but you work with nature, you work with the soil, you work with the climatic conditions, and you try to make the best out of it, but always having in mind that this is not your soil, but that you have only borrowed it from next generations. So you will never do something detrimental to the soil that is the foundation of our product. And whenever I've been traveling around to many of our markets around the world, and we had this conversation, and I was telling how we work in the vineyards, how we work in the winery, how we separate garbage, for example, people were saying, so you do grow organically. You may not have a certificate, but you do grow organically. You have the understanding what organic growing means, and I think that's even more important than the certificate.
Very nice comment from Caroline in Southampton, thanking us for a nice relief from politics and coronaviruses and things like that. It was nice change of listening. Roger asked, drip irrigation like Israel? I'm not sure what Israel drip irrigation is like in Israel. Do you? And do you do it?
I don't know about drip irrigation in Israel. I mentioned before that irrigation, i.e. drip irrigation, has been allowed in Germany for the last few years, but we basically don't have the water supply and we don't have the infrastructure. And drip irrigation is critical in a northern climate. If you irrigate in a climate like in Chile, where you know exactly it's going to rain during the winter month, but it's not going to rain during the summer month, period, then drip irrigation or irrigation in general is certainly a helpful purpose. In our region, you never know if or when you're going to get the next rain or thunderstorm, that is. So you may have a stretch of 3 weeks with extremely hot temperatures, and you think you should irrigate your vines. And you do so, and 3 days after, you get a severe thunderstorm with lots of rain, and all of a sudden you have too much water supply for the plant. And too much water supply for the grapes, so the grapes will eventually explode and get rotten, and you lose the harvest. So drip irrigation is something to be looked at very, very cautiously and carefully, really depending on your microclimate. In our region, drip irrigation would only serve in years like 2015, 2018, where we have seen that the plants had so little water supply that they were basically stopping to nurture the leaves and the grapes. So you see the leaves, I don't know how to word that properly in English, but you could see the leaves that they were basically turning like in the fall. That is the point where drip irrigation is certainly helpful in our region. But drip irrigation is to be looked at very carefully, and on top of that, as we're heading into warmer climates, we need to assess carefully as well if we have the water available locally as well as around the world to irrigate, or if we need the water as drinking water.
Susan from Pine Bluff asks along these lines, what's the best year for vintages from your estate, and is 2020 going to be a good year for your wine?
2020 is good, it's not going to be great. 2019 was great, 2016.
That's a first. I've only ever heard winemakers say this is going to be the vintage of the century.
That's true. It's very unusual to say it's a good vintage, but it's not the greatest. It's certainly the greatest vintage we have had in the last 12 months. That's for sure. Other than that, it's going to be a good vintage, but not a great vintage. Greats were 18, 16, 13. We've had a number of great vintages. When you go back into the 1980s, I couldn't really tell you a great vintage. Yes, 1989, 1988 were great vintages in the 1980s, but there were 2 vintages in a decade. If we're going back the last decade, I can probably pinpoint 5 or 6 great vintages.
Again, this one's from, I think, Tea Tiny, the villages in the villages, United States. I'm not sure what. Oh, I think that's in Florida. Are your fine wines available in the US? So we've already answered that. But are they available in chains like Total Wine, ABC, etc.? They can be. You could go and ask them for it. Small wine merchants will easily get your wines. But the bit I like about his question, Tea Tiny's question, is, or do we have to wait until we go on a Viking river cruise and visit your winery? Well, I think going on a Viking cruise, river cruise sounds fantastic. I couldn't think of anything better to do right now. I've only been on one Viking cruise. It was on the Sky, and every single detail. I've done a lot of cruises because I've been a wine speaker on a lot of cruise lines, all the major ones. But when I went on the Sky, it was just the attention to detail is second to none. And even someone my age who now wears reading glasses, I love the fact that they put big writing, shampoo, and the TV remote has just like 4 or 5 buttons. It's not one of these things where you can't figure out what it's good. They think about every detail. I just loved it. But hopefully they'll go on a river cruise and visit your winery, or maybe even Viking might have some of the wines from the series on the ships. Who knows? We'll have to talk to them about that. But I think those are all the questions I've got today so far. Konstantin, it's been an hour and a half. It was supposed to be an hour, so I'm not sure if anyone's even listening to us anymore.
But we're having fun.
Yeah, we're having great fun. It's really fun to spend an hour with you. One of the nice things about the COVID situation is that it's forced us all to do events on Zoom and Skype and things like that. So we and Teams, whatever. So we see each other a lot more, even though, and we're not even having to fly around to the world to see each other. So it's great to hang out with you for an hour and a half, and I really appreciate everyone who's listened to this. I loved your questions. Thank you so much. And Konstantin, before I wrap up, do you have anything else you'd like to talk about?
Just thank you for having me as your guest speaker, Bartholomew, and thank you to the team of Viking.TV in the background for having arranged this. Obviously, a great thank you to my son Julius, who will hate me for this comment, but Julius has done all the technique in the back. It has been great fun to be on the show. It's been a great honor to have been on the first edition of Viking.TV's Wine Wednesday. I hope you will find my wines wherever you have been watching us. And if and whenever you can travel again, or we can travel again, and you are on a Viking river cruise, you're most welcome to visit me in Nierstein. Give me a gentle note in advance, and I'm happy to show you around, and we'll be looking at whatever we have been looking at, watching at tonight in reality.
Yeah, I'm very impressed with Viking.TV because you think how long it takes a ship to turn around if it's a big ship. Yet Viking is nimble, and we didn't start talking about doing a series on wine until September. And in that time, we've got six episodes lined up. They've got such an amazing team. Well, James Prismal, who has been sending us all the pictures that we've been seeing and the videos, which have been flawlessly done. And then Claire Armitage and Heather Donoghue, who have been my main contacts for getting all the information together. And between that team, that is an amazing team that they've produced a TV show, which only started talking about in September. And now here we are, middle of October, and we're already on episode 1. I'm going to have a glass of this lovely Guntrum Niersteiner Rehbeck Riesling Spätlese.
Same here.
Because we didn't really talk about wines enough, but I hope people will go out and buy them and enjoy them. The blue Riesling's delicious, but I love this Spätlese. It's just delicious. And I hope everyone joins us next week. Next week we have Sandra Bindi-Sagadi from an amazing winery in Italy. We're going to visit Siena in the Chianti Classico regions and Chianti regions of Italy, and we all love Italian wines. So I look forward to seeing everyone next week. And Konstantin, thank you so much again for joining us. And I want to say cheers to you, and hope to see you in person soon. And hope you will go and visit Konstantin one day in Germany. It's a fantastic. If he's there himself, I'm sure he'll run down. If you say you were on the Viking ship, he'll run down and greet you.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.